I got back into Risk of Rain 2 content with the Sonic Challenge, and that seemed to go down fairly well. Plus, let's not kid ourselves, the recent Seekers of the Storm expansion is coming up in less than a week owing to what we saw in that recent announcement, and I figured I'd need to mark the occasion before the deep dive into its content. So I'm delving back into the world of Risk of Rain to try out a new challenge, albeit this one won't involve any mods or the like. But I won't let it stop me, as today I answer the question: can you beat Risk of Rain 2 as a group? Basically, what that means in the context of a single-player run is this. Risk of Rain 2's combat involves you attacking monsters, finding items and summoning drones, friendly monsters and the like to aid you. In this challenge's case, the first option is going to be completely off of the table. What I mean by this is that I will not be allowed to personally attack anything in this run, and will instead need to rely on outside sources to do the job for me. Drones, certain items that provide summons, stuff like that. Without using an artifact to make it so that enemies can inflict friendly fire on one another, this is about as close as I'll get to a pacifist run of this game. I'm also going to be going through things on Monsoon difficulty as I did for the Sonic run. Other than these points, anything goes. Anyway, with that taken care of, let's do this. Being designed explicitly to let other things do the work for him, there's no better candidate for this challenge than the engineer. I too love turret micromanagement simulators. I also could use the recently added Artifact of Devotion to use Lemurian followers for this challenge, but I'm not going to do that as they replace drones, which I would probably prefer of the two. I'll probably give the devoted Lemurians their own challenge run sometime perhaps. Heading into the challenge proper, we start things off in Verdant Falls, the recently added location from the Dead Cells crossover. Since I can't do any attacking myself, my two turrets will have to be the backbone of this run. No surprises there. But I can't just rely on their aid. So while the turrets go to work and rack up some starting funds for me, let's run through what I'm allowed to attack with. I'm obviously allowed my two NG turrets, but I can also use any drones I come across, items such as the Queen's Gland that explicitly summon creatures to fight alongside me, and any equipment that can summon something to do the fighting for me, such as the backup. I guess this also means that I'm somewhat willingly allowing myself the use of squid polyps.
Somebody kill me!
The main takeaway in the early stages is fairly simple. On their own, the turrets currently cannot compete against crowds without sufficient firepower, and given that the run's only just started, that's something I don't have access to yet. So DPS boosters are going to be essential to find for this one. I soon come across my first of many drones in the run, a healing drone, and activate a Shrine of the Mountain. I guess it's the Bungus I happen to find next to it on top of the Lensmaker glasses next to the teleporter that gives me that confidence. Starting the teleporter up, my turret's first opponents are a pair of Stone Titans. And for what it's worth, they do a pretty good job with the firepower that they have access to, cutting down one of the Titans with relative ease. Repositioning them onto the high ground and using the bubble shield to block projectiles coming their way, it isn't long before the other Titan returns to the dirt, dropping a pair of predatory instincts. With nothing to gain from sticking around, I promptly hightail it to the next stage. The game sends me to the abandoned aqueduct next, and my turrets are set to be put to the test by a nearby Void Seed. By positioning them together on this rock, I could simply watch them lay waste to everything around them. Then I move them into the Void Seed zone itself to dispatch any stragglers. Before long, the Void Seed is cleared, and I can begin looting and plundering. Granted, my main pulls end up being a Topaz Brooch and a Needle Tick, but I suppose there are ways I can supplement them. Scouring the remaining area to make sure I didn't miss anything important, which happened to consist of a soldier syringe and some gasoline and not much else, I go to fire up the teleporter when I find an equipment container that gives me a gnarled wood sprite, which in the context of Risk of Rain 2 is essentially Aku Aku. The second boss I have to have my allies face is a Beetle Queen, which goes pretty well as long as the turrets don't get hit by the acid spit. In a short while, the queen is slain and I get a shipping request form out of the deal. I do scour around the map for a bit after the teleporter event is done to look for the two buttons to the hidden cave, but I couldn't find them for the life of me. Though I did find another soldier syringe, so it wasn't a complete waste of time. With that search over, I just decided to head into the blue portal that opened up to see what was on offer at the bazaar between time. What I decided to get was the red item on offer, the Hardlight Afterburner, which in the context of my current build essentially means I have shields for days. Works for me as I decide to take the plunge into the void fields to work on farming some items. Unlike the Sonic run, I know for a fact that Engineer should be more than capable of handling the incoming gauntlet, owing to the fact that he doesn't have to fight alone in here. The first round has me fight against Clay Templars. It is effectively just me holding out against a horde of heavies from TF2, but nothing my turrets can't deal with. Plus they have fairly slow respawn times, so I gain a crowbar out of the situation. Round 2 gives them some slight medical prowess, but again, it's nothing that a constant stream of bullets can't fix, putting me up 1 cup of mocha, a crowbar, and a berserker's pauldron. Round 3 brings Elder Lemurians into the fray. They're somewhat intimidating if they get too close, but my shields can protect me from basically any ranged attack these things can try, giving me another cup of coffee and a roll of pennies. Round 4 is where things start getting tricky as the game decides to grant the two enemies 5 sets of tougher times, which effectively means they're going to be blocking a fair few of my turret's attacks. The fight took a while to get up to the top of the hill, but once it did, things quickly unraveled, as my turrets got shredded under the close range bombardment and I almost got pasted myself if not for me being saved by the bell. Unsurprisingly, I grabbed a focus crystal because I needed my turrets to be as damaging as possible when those things got up close. Grabbing another cup of coffee, it was time for round 5, which added parents to the pool of big things wanting to kill me. Unsurprisingly, it was tense, but my turrets were just about able to hold the line, granting me a Chiaro's band. If superior firepower was what I needed, then that would do nicely. I went hunting for a couple of items before I started round 6, which crucially were a Lepton's Daisy and a Tougher Times, both of which should help my turret's survival. Just as well as the round gave the enemy some Harvester's Scythes, allowing them to heal on crits. Granted, I didn't know if it applied without a source of crits to begin with, but I wasn't about to find out. Unsurprisingly, the 2 items I scavenged turned out to be a major game changer, as even the big things couldn't whittle them down as easily, granting me another set of predatory instincts. Round 7 added some brass contraptions to the mix, but they weren't as big a threat as long as I kept my shields up. I just about survived the wave, enlisted the Squid Polyp's aid, and set to work on round 8. This wave gives the enemy some Old War stealth kits, which aren't really that much of a threat in practice. And begrudgingly, I have to admit that the squid turret was pretty useful as an extra companion, as much as I may hate them in regular play. With the 8th wave done and another fireband on deck, it was time to prep for the final wave, with the monsters being gifted the Aegis. Thankfully, that effectively means nothing as far as the difficulty is concerned. Things did get tense when the monsters finally breached the defensive line, but I was just about able to hold out until the end to earn my red item, which I chose as the Ceremonial Dagger. Simply put, if I can't use this thing myself, I'll just let my turrets handle that. Grabbing a death mark on the way out, I take the teleporter to head back to the main path. Brought into the sulfur pools with some newfound strength, I set my turrets down to let them and their new daggers go to work on the local fauna while I use their gains to grab some more items. The upturn in their damage output is already evident, and I love it, and soon the Void Seed is no more. I scrapped my death mark because it is effectively just dead weight otherwise, grabbed some AP rounds, and decided to make the decision to scrap my free Topaz brooches to funnel them into the nearby syringe printer. The strongest defense is a good offense and all that. I hardly need the brooches when I can find 2 separate Bungai at the drop of a hat after all. So with nothing else to really do, I set up for the Beetle Queen rematch. And to be frank, the Queen and her troops were badly outmatched. With the fire rate to proc crits often and further increased fire rate on top of all of the effects like bleeding and the daggers, soon enough the 2 Beetle Queens I was up against were down for the count. 1 stealth boy and a couple of extra seconds of waiting later and I'm out of the pools. Next stop, Siren's Call. I've now reached the point in the run where bosses will now spawn as regular encounters, so I need to be on my guard from here onwards. Luckily, my turrets do have the firepower to take down these bosses more or less untra-heat-ned. They would especially benefit from the Singularity Band boost, as well as the Ignition tank when paired with gasoline, Plus, I can now swap out my wood sprite for an especially appropriate piece of backup, Goobo Jr. Given how he helped in the Sonic run, this will be even more valuable. If anything, the real problem part was triggering the fight with the hidden boss of this zone, as the turrets won't actively target the eggs, meaning I have to position them in such a way that nearby enemy spawns will have them catch the eggs via proxy. It takes a while, but one by one the egg nests fell, during which I activated another mountain shrine and found some new allies in the gunner turrets, until I was finally able to face the alloy worship unit. I found things like crowbars and a lens maker in the build up to this. Add on the additional backup from Goobo on top of the 2 gunner turrets, and the big ball of death wasn't long for this world. The reward I got was another ceremonial dagger, which, I mean, fine by me. With one more gunner turret recruited into my makeshift army and another death's mark almost bringing death upon me during its scrapping, I activated the teleporter to begin the Magma Worm Double Trouble match. For what it's worth, this wasn't much of an issue at all, but during the chaos, I did lose my first ally as the gunner turret I just recruited cracked under the pressure bombarding it from all sides. No time to mourn its loss though, as I gained more singularity bends from the ordeal and eventually booked it to the Sky Meadow. In a manner similar to the run with Sonic, I spot a lone grandparent off in the distance and decide to throw Goobo at the problem while I dealt with the enemies around me. For what it's worth, I think Goobo or the daggers my turret had stocked up overpowered him, as the guy melted before he could Thanos snap my mechanical army. Works for me. The shuriken weren't useful last time, but at least in this run they could actually serve a purpose. Plus, a random lunapod gave me a gesture of the drowned. Or in other words, a straight upgrade in the context of my run and having summonable help. Gunner turrets are useful allies, but against the mushroom enemies they may as well be cannon fodder, as even my specialized turrets couldn't hold up against their projectile attack. I find a new ally up here though, the equipment drone. No way in hell am I giving him Goobo Jr. though, that'd be daft. So I decided to scour the map in hopes to find an equipment piece to give it in hopes of having a worthwhile ally. And as the lens maker glasses piled up, I got my answer in the most perfect way. The backup. In other words, I now have a drone that periodically creates more drones. Science! Activating this lunar rock to give me a blue portal at the end of all of this, I continued to scour the map and grabbed every drone and item I could get my mitts on, and made sure to align the teleporter with the planet so that I could loop at least once. Look, I like my slowly growing army and all, but let's be blunt. They're not beating Mithrix on their own power. So after grabbing an incinerator drone for the collection, I worked my way to the teleporter to fight the Solus control unit. An incredible piece of luck, which is something I wouldn't learn until after the fight concluded, as it granted me the empathy cores. These grant me 2 unique allies that gain more power the more allies I have. So I guess that's even more reason to go on an expanded recruitment drive. With that done, I head into the bazaar again to see what I have to work with going into loop number 2. I also can't help but notice that my core buddies join me in here. That's something, I guess. Either way, I gain myself a focused convergence and a brilliant behemoth, which is effectively just a damage booster. Loop number 2 begins where it all started, back at Verdant Falls. Only this time, we have action from the very start. I'm already aware of how long this video is by this point, so I'll just keep things brief unless something of interest happens. After scouring the falls for some allies, which consisted of a gunner drone, I activated the teleporter and came up against some beetle queens again. Considering my vastly superior firepower, all of these bugs were crushed handily. After the teleporter event was through, I scoured the map one more time to check for any drones or the like I may have missed. In order, I found a ukulele, a healing drone, a gunner turret, and an emergency drone. All in all, a fairly successful recruitment drive. Next stop was the Aphelion Sanctuary, and I won't lie, I was a little concerned for my turrets at the thought of having to deal with the Void Seed. But surprisingly, they were able to hold out with very little in the way of problems. The incinerator drone seemed to get mauled in the chaos, but don't worry, we can rebuild him. Things were looking up, but I then made the dumbest mistake I could have made for a build centered on engineer. I grabbed the Weeping Fungus. Silly past Matt, the Sonic run was last time. It's not a run-ending mistake by any stretch of the imagination, but this means that I'm going to have to play more defensively when it comes to assigning shields to my turrets. I also found another equipment drone, but I don't think I ever found anything that I used it on, so it's not joining me. Shame. Either way, the teleporter event was about with around 4 Clay Dune Striders, and my turrets had more than enough firepower to bring them down one by one. They were soon dealt with, I got an infusion, and that's enough for me. I got brought back to the sulfur pools again, and I just let my turrets lay waste to everything in their sights, as is the norm at this point. I figured that I didn't have much to do at this point, as I just activated the teleporter early, leading to, you guessed it, more Beetle Queens.
How many times do we have to teach you this lesson, old man?
They were situated above ground rather than in the cavern, so I did need to reposition my own turrets for this bug squashing session, but they soon fell to my might, granting another ignition tank. Once the teleporter wait was over, I began scouring the map to check for anything I may have missed. The only things of note were another can of gasoline and another crowbar, so I moved on to stage 9. Abyssal Depths gave me a unique test for the first time, as it brings a scavenger into the fold. According to all known laws of aviation, these fat pack rats shouldn't be able to fly, but when you loot the Milky Chrysalis, I suppose anything's possible. Targeting them early is essential, as when you kill the first one in any map that contains them, they drop their backpack and grant some pretty valuable goodies, giving me a decent surge in power. The only problem is that there are multiple scavengers around and a metric ton of other enemies alongside them, so the enemies now have the firepower to start reliably taking my mechanical brethren down. It takes a significant amount of work, but I eventually clear out all of the rogue scavengers and buy myself some respite, as well as the opportunity to get my troops back up and running. The mega chest in the alcove could also be bought, which gives me my second hardlight afterburner. I suppose I won't have to worry about running out of defensive shields anytime soon. I once again begin to scout the map for drones and items to feed my growing army, eventually feeling satisfied enough to begin the teleporter event. The game decided to throw some imp overlords my way, and I was pretty shocked at just how fast they got torn apart. Of course, my turrets didn't survive the onslaught, but all I needed to do was wait until I could spawn one more in to finish the last one off. The reward for this was a Shatter Spleen, which I think might be useful this late into the run, but I honestly don't know. Suffice to say, the battle had taken a toll on my metal troops, so I needed to buy them back into the fray and recruit a nearby gunner turret to shore up the ranks, before moving on to the second stab at Sky Meadow. Once again, I spot a scavenger off in the distance and make a beeline towards it with the full-blooded intent to murderize it for its valuables. It had a pretty decent haul too, including a headset stuck in the mix. I can't make use of the shockwave attack though, but having the increased jumps and lack of fall damage is incentive enough. I did contemplate giving the crowdfunder I found to an equipment drone in the ground, but decided against it in case it prematurely activated with the gesture of the drowned. Instead, I decided on a Shrine of the Mountain. What's the worst that could happen? Well, the boss fight against the Mending Solus units told me, as I ran out of space on my computer for the recording to continue. A Payday 2 challenge run I'm working on is the culprit for that one, so the entire battle got skipped over. Believe me when I say it wasn't too bad. It gave me a pair of ignition tanks for the collection, and it wasn't as if I had a problem maintaining my troops once the main baddies were taken care of. My army has come quite a long way from the humble beginnings we started with an hour ago, so with nothing else to gain, I activated the teleporter to head up to the final stage. Unlike with the Sonic run, I immediately ran into issues before the first pillar, as the flying rapid-fire enemies utterly tore me a new one and broke every last one of my delicate watches, cutting down on my damage. Somewhat mitigating this is the fact that 3 of the pillars I needed were right next to each other, but with those flying machine gun enemies around, this was not going to be a walk in the park. My bubble shield was pretty much the only element that was keeping the run alive in this portion, as I stood and watched the carnage unfold around me. Mercifully, it seemed I got through the initial onslaught with no casualties that I noticed, but even still, grinding out these pillars wasn't easy. Not least because my empathy cores were seemingly sitting this one out. It was here that I experimented with my turrets on top of the slowly lowering pillars, and found out that they could defy gravity while like this. I suppose that helps when it comes to the little orb drones that spit hot fire on the ground. With this new knowledge gathered, I completed the third of my pillars needed, and immediately booked it at the first chance I got. Swinging by the Cauldron Zone, I didn't really see anything that would be inherently useful, and the only thing the Lunapod Zone offered was the taste of death. So I decided to just fly on over to the final pillar, that being the Pillar of Blood, and ground it out within seconds. With that massacre over, I headed up to the final zone, and whiffed the entry. Try that again, and I actually land my feet on the ground this time, meaning it's now time for my miniature army to go to work on reconstructing Mithrix's face. Unsurprisingly, given the level of firepower I have at my disposal, Mithrix's health gets torn to bits. The only problem is, he can wreck my assistants just as easily as they can tear through him. But before long, we grind our way through his health bar and begin phase 2, which isn't really a huge deal. As long as I kept on top of everything, I was more than capable of holding out. Phase 3, however, is where things got real dicey. For the most part, Mithrix can still be cheesed by the high ground, but when he does this particular attack, it effectively is the same as Thanos snapping my army, as any drones, turrets, or the like caught in the areas of attack get one shot like it was nothing. Of course, because thuns are not a problem this late into the run, I can revive my mechanical children no problem, but he can mess them up again just as easily, as he does multiple times to the turrets and almost to me. This effectively turned this phase into a race against the clock to keep every one of my drones up and about before they could all be destroyed, which wasn't easy. In the end, the only thing that could reliably work was brute forcing what was left of his health bar to give me the opportunity to repair the Fallen while my items were stolen. Of course, because I still have a plethora of turrets and drones to shoot at Mithrix, all I needed to do was dodge his desperation attacks. With the power of friendship and several thousand bullets, the King of Nothing breathes his last. Making sure I still had most if not all of my backup with me, it was now time to return to the rescue ship and begin the final siege, which was a cakewalk. Not surprisingly, when you have two cannons that can do all of the work for you, a holdout like this becomes a piece of cake. Add the empathy cores and all of my other amassed backup that has made it this far, and suffice to say, my victory was a foregone conclusion. With my army successfully holding the line, I got inside the rescue ship, finishing the game and proving that yes, you can indeed beat Risk of Rain 2 as a group / one-man army / whatever. Not a whole lot to say in the end, really. It was just a really interesting way to play the game. In particular, it's worth mentioning that I didn't even tap into this idea's full potential, as I could have used so many other items that could have given me another form of ally. But I suppose this does leave this challenge open to a part 2 where I get all of those diverse allies. But I'd have to use a certain artifact to help with that. Either way, I'm just glad that those elements weren't required in the end for this challenge run. Well, that's that for this video, so throw us a like if you enjoyed, subscribe for more, and feel free to leave any suggestions for future challenge runs in the comments below. I'm always open to ideas, and what you suggest to me could end up being a future video. But until that point comes along, I'll see you on whatever I do next. Take care now.